faithfully conveying value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally here with the Book Talk. The Meiji Restoration is probably the most well-known piece of Japanese history among Chinese folks. Thanks to this deep and huge reform, Japan jumped from a backward feudal country to become an imperialist powerhouse. Mutsuhito, who served as Japan's emperor then, was later portrayed as the unmatched Emperor Meiji. After he died, Japan's government went as far as building Meiji Shrine just to honor him. Was this famous emperor just a political mascot on a pedestal, or the real mastermind behind Japan's modern shift? Today, the book Emperor Meiji that I'm reviewing will give you the full scoop. The book's author, Donald Keene, is a Columbia University emeritus professor who's spent his life researching Japanese culture. Apart from this Emperor Meiji book, he's penned others like A History of Japanese Literature and helped translate works by big names like Osamu Dazai and Yasunari Kawabata. He's a famous scholar of Japanese history and culture in the West. And in 2008, Emperor Akihito gave him the Order of Culture. This Emperor Meiji book is a biography he crafted by digging into tons of Japanese historical records and blending them with accounts from Europe and America at the time. It covers the big historical moments in Emperor Meiji's life, from his youth to the Great Council of State Restoration, then starting the Meiji Restoration to expand outward, building the militarist path. It sketches out that tumultuous period. All right, next up, we'll kick off with Emperor Meiji's birth and dive into the life of this iconic modern historical figure. Back on October 15, 1851, at the home of court bigwig Nakayama Tadayasu, everyone was anxiously waiting outside a room. In there was his daughter Keiko, who served as Emperor Komei's attendant, basically a concubine, and she was pregnant, ready to deliver. Since back then in Japan, childbirth was seen as unclean and couldn't dirty the palace, Keiko went back home to have her baby. At 1 in the afternoon, a cry finally rang out from the room. Keiko had a boy, and he was Emperor Komei's son. After Emperor Komei's sole surviving son was born, later to be Emperor Meiji, Prince Mutsuhito, they held a bunch of fancy rituals to show off his high status. Right after Mutsuhito was born, the maids nearby wrapped him up in 3 strips of fine white silk. Afterwards, the Nakayama family put out all the fires in their home and relit them using fire brought from outside, so this clean fire could cleanse away impurities. People fetched water from Kyoto's Kamo River, mixed it with well water, and bathed Mutsuhito, and they placed him on a specially made small bed with one end higher than the other. After that, the court on Myoji performed ancient rituals and divination to pick an auspicious day to bury the prince's placenta. Emperor Komei, Mutsuhito's father, was eager to see his child, but had to wait another month, because by tradition, only after 30 days could Mutsuhito be carried back to the palace by his mother. Gracious and structured tone. He lived in his mother's quarters with many attendants, had endless sweets and toys, and took part in ancient rituals. According to court officials' records, this future emperor was stubborn from a young age and often did things his own way. But, for instance, protocol required Mutsuhito to ride in a palanquin when traveling. But he really disliked it and often insisted on walking, even though his palanquin represented his princely status. So the attendants had to put an amulet representing Mutsuhito in the palanquin and carry it behind him, pretending the noble prince was still inside. Also, Mutsuhito often showed an impulsive side in his childhood. His study companions were punched more than once for angering him. Even a respected nobleman who disciplined him strictly was pushed into a pond from behind when Mutsuhito got the chance. These self-centered, stubborn, and impulsive traits stayed with Mutsuhito his whole life and might be the root of many decisions he made later. As Prince Mutsuhito, he received traditional education starting with calligraphy. For a European prince, whether their handwriting was beautiful might not have mattered much. But in Japan, calligraphy is a crucial skill, and one's level is thought to reflect their character. Mutsuhito clearly worked hard at calligraphy, earned his teacher's praise, and often showed his work to others. Since Confucianism was widespread in Japan, Confucian classics were a major part of Mutsuhito's education. He started with the classic of filial piety and gradually moved to texts like the Four Books and Five Classics, taught through Sodoku, where the teacher reads each passage 3 times without explanation. For Then Mutsuhito would read aloud after the teacher and memorize it. This teaching method was popular during the Edo period. But for a kid, sitting around all day memorizing meaningless phrases must have been super boring. Years later, when recalling these study days, Mutsuhito wrote a poem. A few lines went like this. Back then I really hated homework, because my only interest was riding bamboo horses. So much for the young life of this future emperor. Now, what did the title of emperor actually mean in Japanese politics back then? In late 19th century Japan, there were 2 parallel governments: the imperial court, headed by the emperor, and the shogunate, led by the shogun. Though historically Japanese emperors were supreme rulers like Chinese emperors, imperial power declined from the mid-8th century. After Minamoto no Yoritomo established the Kamakura shogunate in 1992, regional lords pledged nominal loyalty to the emperor, but actually served the shogun. So even though Mitsuhito's dad was the revered emperor, real power rested entirely with Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. The shogun's relatives and loyal retainers got wealthy domains and high posts, making all decisions without outside input, while less connected or formally hostile lords were assigned remote territories. Like Satsuma in Kyushu, Tosa in Shikoku, and Choshu at the western tip of Honshu. Since the Tokugawa shogunate began, it distrusted them, politically suppressing them while extracting resources. Harsh policies that backfired. As for the emperor and court, well, sorry, but they were just figureheads. As the nominal head of state, he only needed to stamp documents sent by the shogunate. Otherwise, the emperor and court nobles just lived in luxury, passing time with literature and religion studies. And this system, emperor in Kyoto, shogun in Edo, Tokyo, had operated for over 200 years by Mutsuhito's birth. In this environment, Mutsuhito quickly mastered Confucian classics and became skilled at poetry. Given time, he might have become a proper traditional Japanese nobleman, but the change in times altered Mutsuhito's path of growth. By now, it was mid-19th century. Western powers were colonizing overseas, and Japan's isolation was about to end. In 1853, when Mutsuhito was just 2, American Commodore Perry led a fleet to Tokyo Bay, demanding Japan open its doors and sign a trade treaty. Since Perry's ships were painted black, this became known as the Black Ship Incident. Under Perry's military threat, the shogunate signed the Convention of Kanagawa, opening 2 ports for trade. Hearing of this, Britain, Russia, and the Netherlands rushed in to sign unequal treaties with Japan. These treaties delivered a massive psychological blow to the Japanese. In their eyes, Japan was a divine land with an eternal imperial line. Even the mighty Mongols had been repelled. Now they'd bowed to Westerners' demands, letting them tread on sacred soil. It was utterly humiliating. Facing this unprecedented crisis, what should the nation do? Japan split into factions. The Kaikoku-ha, who wanted full openness and Western learning. The Joi-ha, who burned to expel all foreigners. The Tobacco-ha, who saw the Edo shogunate as corrupt traitors needing overthrow. And the Sano-ha, who insisted only direct imperial rule could save Japan. These factions despised each other, suppressed rivals in government, and even plotted assassinations. This chaos lasted until Emperor Komei and Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu died in quick succession. Against this backdrop, the newly enthroned Mutsuhito faced a nation on the brink. Let's see what historic events awaited this young emperor and what role he'd play. In January 1867, Emperor Komei died, and 16-year-old Crown Prince Mutsuhito ascended as Emperor Meiji. This era name came from the I Ching, The sage faces south to govern, ruling with enlightenment. The young emperor finally had his chance to engage directly in governance. But Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu was drowning in crises. Earlier, Chief Minister Inosuke enforced opening policies through the Ansei Purge, exiling or killing dissenting nobles, which made domains like Choshu and Satsuma take up arms against the shogunate. Inosuke himself got assassinated by rebels outside Edo, seriously weakening the shogunate's authority. Tokugawa Yoshinobu took over as shogun. Not many years later, for Tokugawa Yoshinobu, he faced a total mess, with everyone turning against him. Internal chaos unresolved, external threats popping up. In 1867, the French envoy pushed the shogunate to open ports fast according to the treaty. Court of Hyogo. Given the bloody example of the open country guy, Inosuke, Tokugawa Yoshinobu didn't want to take the blame for selling out Japan, so he pulled a Sai move, saying he needed the emperor's okay first before deciding. After some back and forth, Emperor Meiji issued an edict agreeing to open the ports. Maybe realizing that opening up was unavoidable with those Western powers breathing down their necks. This order didn't spark any fuss from the feudal lords, so Tokugawa Yoshinobu breathed easy, probably feeling pretty smug about it. But whoa, this move ended up opening the door to the shogunate's doom. For over 200 years, since the Edo shogunate started, they'd avoided letting the emperor handle state affairs directly. But this time, Tokugawa Yoshinobu sent a clear signal to everyone that this call was the emperor's, not the shogunate's. Though we can guess this decree came from court nobles, not the young emperor who'd only been on the throne a few months. But this made all the anti-shogunate forces see Emperor Meiji as a perfect banner. They could use his name to oppose the shogunate. Among them were the feudal lords long crushed by the shogunate. They were mostly along Japan's southwest coast, had their foreign trade rights snatched by the shogunate, and were already bitter. With the shogunate weakening, powerful domains like Choshu, Satsuma, Hizen, and Tosa led the charge, forming an anti-shogunate alliance. Under the slogan of restoring imperial power, they quickly teamed up with the court, using big events to even challenge the shogunate. In May 1867, the shogunate arrested a bunch of Christians in Nagasaki, sparking protests from foreign envoys. Hearing this, Emperor Meiji gathered his ministers and said, Japan had laws banning Christianity. These believers broke the rules knowingly and should be executed. That he could demand this shows Emperor Meiji was still pretty conservative then. But after chatting with ministers like Kido Takayoshi, he changed his tune, letting Kido handle it flexibly. Most arrested Christians got released home. In the eyes of foreign envoys and common people, Emperor Meiji was undoubtedly more progressive than the shogun. Meanwhile, Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu was busy leading troops against rebellious Choshu domain, suffering defeats on the battlefield. The court seized this chance to issue several harsh imperial edicts in Emperor Meiji's name, ordering the execution of two key shogunate supporters for undermining national stability, Matsudaira Mochiaki and Matsudaira Sadaki, and to punish Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu himself. These edicts clearly came from reformist officials at court, aiming to shake the shogun's authority. Though symbolic, unlikely to be enforced, the worsening war situation made regional lords increasingly eager to break from the shogunate. On November 8, 1867, to avoid escalating civil war, Tokugawa Yoshinobu tentatively proposed returning political power to the imperial court during a meeting with feudal lords. Representatives from Satsuma, Choshu, and Tosa loudly supported it, while the vast majority of other lords stayed silent. Utterly disappointed, Tokugawa Yoshinobu decided to retreat strategically to lay low. So, that same day, he submitted a formal petition returning the great governance to the court. 2 days later, monumental historical shift. On January 4, 1868, the Imperial Restoration policy was announced, making Emperor Meiji Japan's sole ruler in principle. Tokugawa Yoshinobu then proposed a British-style constitutional monarchy, where the emperor held supreme power but didn't govern directly. Otherwise, the emperor and court nobles just lived in luxury, passing time with literature and religion studies. Thus, the system of emperor in Kyoto and shogun in Edo, Tokyo, had operated for over 200 years by Mutsuhito's birth. In this environment, Mutsuhito quickly mastered Confucian classics and became skilled at poetry. Given time, he might have become a proper traditional Japanese nobleman. But the changing times altered Mutsuhito's path of growth. By now, it was mid-19th century. Western powers were colonizing overseas, and Japan's isolation was about to end. In 1853, when Mutsuhito was just 2, American Commodore Perry led a fleet to Tokyo Bay, demanding Japan open its doors and sign a trade treaty. Since Perry's ships were painted black, this became known as the Black Ship Incident. Under Perry's military threat, the shogunate signed the Convention of Kanagawa, opening 2 ports for trade. Hearing of this trade opportunity, Britain, Russia, and the Netherlands locked in, signing a bunch of unequal treaties with Japan. These treaties delivered a massive psychological blow to the Japanese folks back then. In their eyes, Japan was a divine land with an unbroken imperial line. Even the mighty Mongol invasions got beaten back. This time, they actually signed treaties as demanded by Westerners, letting him tread on sacred soil. It was utterly humiliating. Facing this unprecedented crisis, what should the nation do next? Japan was split all over. There was the Kaikoku faction pushing for full openness and learning from the West. The Joy faction burned with passion to kick all foreigners out of Japan. There was the Tobaku faction who saw the Edo shogunate as corrupt and traitorous, meeting overthrow, and the Sano faction shouting that only the emperor himself ruling could save the day. And all the 5 titles disadvance. These factions couldn't convince each other, despised one another, suppressed rivals in government, and even plotted assassinations on the sly. This chaotic mess lasted until Emperor Komei and Tokugawa Ieyasu died one after another. Against this backdrop, the newly enthroned Mutsuhito faced the challenge of a nation on the brink. Let's see what historic events await this young emperor and what role he'll play in them. In January 1867, Emperor Komei passed away, and 16-year-old Crown Prince Mutsuhito ascended as Emperor Meiji. This era name comes from Confucian texts, like the I Ching, meaning the sage faces south to govern, ruling with enlightenment. The young emperor finally got his chance to dive into governance head-on. But Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu was drowning in crises. Earlier, Chief Minister Ii Naosuke enforced opening policies through the Ansei Purge, exiling or killing dissenting nobles, which made domains like Choshu and Satsuma take up arms against the shogunate. Well, Inosuke himself got assassinated by rebels outside Edo, seriously weakening the shogunate. Tokugawa Yoshinobu took over as shogun, not many years later for Tokugawa Yoshinobu. He faced a total mess, with everyone turning against him, internal chaos still raging, external threats popping up. In 1867, the French envoy pushed the shogunate to open ports quickly as per the treaty. Port of Hyogo. Given the bloody example of Inosuke, Tokugawa Yoshinobu didn't want to take the blame for selling out Japan, so he pulled a sly move, saying he needed the emperor's okay first. After several rounds of negotiations, Emperor Meiji issued an edict agreeing to open the ports, perhaps realizing that opening the country was unavoidable when facing Western powers. This order didn't cause opposition from regional lords, so Tokugawa Yoshinobu sighed in relief, probably feeling smug about his decision. But unexpectedly, this move opened the door to the shogunate's downfall. For over 200 years since the Edo shogunate's establishment, it had avoided letting emperors directly handle state affairs. This time, Tokugawa Yoshinobu clearly signaled that this decision came from the emperor, not the shogunate, though we can reasonably believe this edict came from court nobles, not the young emperor who'd just taken the throne months earlier. This made all anti-shogunate forces realize Emperor Meiji was a perfect banner, they could use his name to oppose the shogunate. Among them were feudal lords long suppressed by the shogunate, mainly along Japan's southwest coast. They'd lost foreign trade rights to the shogunate and resented it. With shogunate authority declining, powerful domains like Choshu, Satsuma, Hizen, and Tosa led the formation of an anti-shogunate alliance. Chanting "Restore imperial power," they quickly merged with the court, using major events as bargaining chips against the shogunate. In May 1867, the shogunate arrested many Christians in Nagasaki, provoking protests from foreign envoys. Hearing this, Emperor Meiji gathered ministers and stated, Japan had laws banning Christianity. These believers knowingly broke the law and should be executed. That he demanded this shows Emperor Meiji remained conservative then. But after consulting ministers like Kido Takayoshi, he changed his mind, letting Kido handle it flexibly. Most arrested Christians were released. To foreign envoys and commoners, Emperor Meiji seemed far more progressive than the shogun. Meanwhile, Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu was busy fighting rebellious Choshu, but kept losing battles. The court seized this chance to issue harsh imperial edicts in Emperor Meiji's name, ordering 2 key shogunate supporters executed for undermining national stability, Matsudaira Mochiaki and Matsudaira Sadaki, and to punish Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu himself. These edicts clearly came from reformist court officials aiming to undermine the shogun's authority. Though symbolic, unlikely to be enforced, the worsening war made regional lords increasingly eager to break from the shogunate. On November 8, 1867, to avoid escalating civil war, Tokugawa Yoshinobu tentatively proposed returning political power to the imperial court during a meeting with feudal lords. Representatives from Satsuma, Choshu, and Tosa loudly supported it, while most other lords stayed silent. Utterly disappointed, Tokugawa Yoshinobu decided to retreat strategically. That same day, he submitted the petition for Taisei Hokan, return of imperial rule. 2 days later, Emperor Meiji approved. On January 4, 1868, the Imperial Restoration was announced, making Emperor Meiji Japan's sole ruler in principle. Tokugawa Yoshinobu then proposed a British-style constitutional monarchy to eliminate feudal fragmentation. On July 14, 1871, the Meiji government abolished all 274 domains through the Heihan-Chicken Decree. They were reorganized into 72 prefectures, 3 urban prefectures, Fu, and 1 circuit, Do, all centrally appointed. Former lords were summoned to Tokyo, joining old court nobles to form the Kazoku aristocracy. Though stripped of real power, they retained high status and comfortable livelihoods. The Meiji government then implemented sweeping political reforms, establishing executive, legislative, and judicial branches modeled after Western governments. With major governmental restructuring complete, the Meiji regime could focus on economic and cultural development. In 1874, Finance Minister Okubo Toshimichi submitted the Shokusan Kogyo proposal to Emperor Meiji, advocating full-scale industrial development. The government built model factories while actively supporting privately founded companies. For a time, Japan's commerce and industry flourished vibrantly. Simultaneously, the Meiji government promoted Bunmei Kaika, civilization, and enlightenment, adopting Western ideas and lifestyles. Japan not only built modern schools for Western-style education, but also promoted Western living habits. Emperor Meiji himself played a major role in pushing this forward. As the nation's leader, he even took the lead in eating steak, a blasphemous act against gods and Buddha in the past. In 1868, when receiving foreign envoys, he still wore traditional robes, shaved eyebrows, and wore face powder. By 1873, at age 22, he'd cut his top knot, adopted Western attire, and received foreign diplomats. There was no difference in clothing now. Following the emperor's example, all levels of Japanese society embraced Western learning. Notably, Emperor Meiji's rapid acceptance of Western ideas owed much to his tutors. tutors like Yokoi Shonan, Hito Takeyoshi, and Motoda Eifu were learned Confucians but unorthodox. They believed Emperor Meiji needed practical governance skills alongside theory. So they added Western history, philosophy, and even horsemanship to his curriculum. Riding became his lifelong passion. As he matured, reformists like Iwakura Tomomi pushed him to study international law and foreign languages. Emperor Meiji was exceptionally diligent. His tutor Katsu Kaishu noted classes began at 7 a.m., but he'd arrive by 5 a.m. This diligence and transformative let him boldly absorb Western knowledge to modernize Japan. During the Restoration, railways and phone lines spread across Japan. Citizens saw innovations daily as modernization accelerated. But not everyone welcomed these changes, especially samurai forced to cut traditional hair and surrender swords. Worse, ending samurai stipends and drafting peasants into modern armies left many unemployed and destitute, fueling resentment. In January 1877, samurai finally rebelled in Kagoshima, the famed Satsuma Rebellion. Though rebels claimed to target evil advisors around the emperor, Meiji dispatched the new army and navy to crush them. After 8 months of fierce fighting, the government forces won a complete victory. The rebellion's leaders were either killed or captured, marking the end of the samurai class's final uprising. End of the samurai. End of the samurai, but the Satsuma Rebellion had a small aftermath. Even after the rebellion failed, the idea of assassinating the emperor's corrupt advisors didn't disappear. Okubo Toshimichi, one of the 3 great nobles of the Restoration, was killed by an assassin on his way to work. Hearing this news, Emperor Meiji was deeply saddened, but officials around him, including Okubo's successor, Ito Hirobumi, told him that since the Meiji Restoration, key government posts had been held by people from Satsuma and Choshu domains. Though nominally ruled by the emperor, people actually saw a few powerful officials taking turns running the country. As a result, whenever people didn't understand government policies, they'd assume these officials were manipulating things behind the scenes, sparking public anger. That's what happened with the Satsuma Rebellion and this assassination. To better implement government policies, the emperor must play a more active role in governance. Emperor Meiji accepted this advice. So, what changes would Japan undergo after the Meiji Restoration? And what role did Emperor Meiji himself play? I'll continue explaining Emperor Meiji's story in the next episode. That's all for now. Find show notes below the audio. See you next time.